Welcome to day 10 of this Nodevember, and the magic word for today is zip. So with this particular piece, I decided to go with the concept of the 8 of Wands in Tarot, which is the card for speed. Since zip also has a double meaning of zipping things together, it also could mean fast. So I thought, alright, let's do both. So I start with a rounded tube, and I instance more rounded tubes on a rounded tube, so I have a rounded tube system. And then from there I use my mesh blend by proximity asset, which blends all of the instances to the source mesh, normals, and also uses blended materials. In this case I only use the normals. Since the topology is pretty low poly, it's going to be pretty basic, so I thought, alright, so I'll use a little bit of displacement to kind of fit things together, use the basic normals to fit together, and this is all built-in assets from EEVEE. And then from there I decide to, looks alright, go into the materials. So to start with the materials, I use a wave texture, or I think it was called gabor noise, which has kind of a stretched waviness, and I bring that into the displacement of the actual material. I also use some basic colors and mix that in with some noise textures, and I bring that out into the displacement and use a hard EEVEE mask shader material, which is also another asset to bring in the actual look and vibe of everything. And then I add in another noise texture to mix into the displacement to kind of get that old bark look. And I realize that some of my normals are inverted, so I flip them around on my instances, and it's probably something I need to fix on my actual assets. And then I tune things to taste with the noises, and also adding in geometry displacement directly on the geometry nodes before the shader displacement. So I'm finding that using shader displacement with materials and geometry displacement from geometry nodes, both really powerful systems. And then I realize, cool, I can just make different sticks, 8 of them, with different seeds, and then I use a bake node to get some performance, because right now the repeat zone on my mesh blending is not very performant with a lot of meshes, so I decide to bake them down instant performance. So from there I make the card shape, and I'm thinking I'll probably have to use like a fake parallax, so I use another rounded cube and I punch a hole inside of a procedural cube with gizmos, and I use the hole as an actual holdout for the background. So I'm going to add in the background and compositing later, since it's going to be cast as transparent, and then I can build a whole world behind the portal. So this is a fake portal since I'm using EEVEE. In Cycles you have a portal node system which uses the camera rays and everything, and then you cast a window, but in this case I'll just make a fake window with the actual boolean mesh. So from there I start to assign 2 different materials and realize that some of my booleans are a bit crazy, so I decide to improve that a little bit better with the way that I'm working with the booleans, so that I have a window frame. And then from there, now I can use the actual environment and work things out. So I decide to use my procedural primitives included with EEVEE and position them into place manually using the gizmos. As you've seen with most of these videos, this is kind of like a manual concept of positioning things using a transform node inside of geometry nodes, but in this case you're using the transforms directly in the 3D viewport. So I thought they are practically the same, one is faster than the other, so I'll do it directly in the viewport. From there I add in an extra sphere, flip the normals, and I add in some shaders to get a gradient into the actual look. So I try to understand how the gradient's working, and then from there I map range that gradient on the sphere and bring it out. So now I start thinking about building the zip system using some curves. So I use the roll hair curve asset provided by Blender onto some curves, position them into place, and now I have a basic zip. Now how I put this together is going to depend on building the system. So I decide to get 4 on each side from each of the instances of my sticks, and I start to position them into place. To do that, I needed to think about how to align it, and I wasn't sure how. So I decided to eventually just manually align it with a little bit of randomization, and then offset each one to the other to bring it in together into a general zip shape. And then from there, I start thinking about, alright, so on the frequency of the zipping, how do they come together? And with that, I use some mapping. So now that I have the zip system, the sticks kind of aligned together, I start tuning things to taste by changing different randomization seeds or factors, or working on the filling, the positioning, how things will move together or not. And I try to transform things as we go over the zooming a little bit here and there, so I get a little bit of an arc, and it's all tuned to taste. In general, at this point, I wasn't entirely sure how to get the arc or the motion into the system, so I try to use some curve sampling or changes of things. I experiment here and there to try and get a general position into place as things are moving, as they go up and down. So a common theme between all of these Nodevembers is that I'm using the map range and a simple value or float. And using the beefar's colors, I can see which node is what very quickly. The icons help quickly. As you can see, I'm not really organizing my trees, but the colors are helping a lot. So I'm now wondering how to tune the rotations as things go up and down the curve, and I get a little bit of a difficulty, I guess you could say. So mapping the ranges on vectors or onto values on the different properties or settings would help me get a nicer animation. And I pedal on this for a little bit actually, and then I realized, okay, tumbling in, good enough. Kind of looks like a zip. I think people will understand it, the general message that I have. So I start moving onwards, and that is in the materials of the background. So with the materials, I start doing just a simple green. I bring in the zeta depth to try to get some fake atmospheric depth into the system. That wasn't really working because I keep forgetting how to use depth properly inside of shaders, or maybe the world's very small. So then I go into just linear lighting, the geometry normals and things like that, and bringing that into the displacement of the ground just ever so slightly to bring out the normals and the bump of that shape. I then set up the lighting, position my composition a little bit, make sure that it works in all angles with the animation. I start throwing in volumetrics, very soft, to kind of get a nice atmosphere. Check the animation, and then from there I move into compositing. Now in the compositing stage of things, I decided to use a cryptomat to drive in the mask of the background and then just render everything else. So I was wondering how to do this, and I had some new nodes, so I started synchronizing my work, and I've got a new library to play with. So then from there I start using my vector mapping, which is now included in the next release of beefar's, hopefully this coming week. And with that, I also use the gradient, circle, materials, or other things like that in a spherical to bring out a nice soft rounded material as a background. And then I start playing with the actual motion and checking that everything works okay. I also start to isolate the border material using cryptomats on material, and then from there I can start color grading or tuning the lighting or the look of the general vibe. I tune the zip animation as well, and I bring it all together using keyframes. So typically, yes, this is supposed to be all procedural. In general, keyframes on a timeline is A to B, and it can be done using mapped ranges or geometry nodes frames, but you could also do it inside of a single timeline. So I thought, it's kind of like positioning with gizmos in the viewport versus using a map transform node in the editor. So I guess keyframes are a similar thing, and that would be my exception. I highly encourage working around things. In general, using all three editors to bring out the final look is absolutely awesome, but also understanding that proceduralism gives us flexibility to store animation, repeat it, and to create seeds. So I thought, okay, let's work with that. So I'm using a Pruitt noise with the zeta depth mask, and I try to bring out some edges onto the actual shape, kind of get a cartoon look, make it more flat. I throw in some more lights, or rim lights, to bring out the stylization as well. And I'm not entirely sure on the final look, so I've got edges, and I start thinking of like just throwing a string, throw it into some procedural text and position it into place. In this case, I don't use the actual transforms in 3D view. I use it in the transform of the editor. So I start selecting those elements to wrap out the edges using the cryptomats, and then from there I dilate and erode to make the lines a bit thicker and bring out two different kuharas to slightly bring out the size. And I drive the two kuharas using a pixel depth node, because this will make sure that the kuhara looks exactly how it does in the viewport as it does in the render, since the render is usually much larger than my viewport. So if a render is like 2K tall and my viewport's 1K, I got to make sure that the kuhara looks good in both 2K and 1K by making sure that the pixel absolute width of the kuhara works together. And then from there I've got some compositor or shader patterns, and I decide to use a transparent window into the actual material to kind of get a card specular over the window to kind of get that look. This unfortunately screws with my depth pass and my noise and things. I thought maybe I could like make it more tolerant, or just use specific masks of just those sticks without going into an extra view layer. But the problem is it started to draw lines over the alpha noise. So I try to clamp it even harder, and it's not going to work too well. But then I find a nice sweet spot between it all as I tone it down, but it's still very noisy and doesn't look so good. So I thought maybe the normal pass or position pass will do a bit better, and no, it's the actual billboard that's in the way. So then I stop and I think, how do I solve this? So I decide to remove it completely, or make it much more transparent, and then I relight things a bit better so that I get that specularity kind of built in. I light the background, I light the sticks a bit better with a nicer rim, I balance the kuhara a bit better, I make sure that the background's a bit more interesting, and that the lighting of the world and the colors of the world is a bit more interesting. And then I use the border as an actual texture with a 3D hybrid, smooth tiles and the simplex noise mixed together to kind of get an interesting card, embroidered card or printed card into the material. I decide to make it a bit more yellowish or golden card with some nice reflection, and so I will hint to the window material using the shader and break it up with another type of dots or noise, and then I will start just playing with the lighting and bring out like a sun lamp, some more mountains into the view, and go from there. So I always forget to switch to GPU when I'm compositing. That's important. I use split toning to bring in the color of the golden card with a kind of a nice blue highlights. I added some Blender assets for the film grain, throw in a glare as well, and I alpha that over, and I think it's pretty much done now, ready for the render. So I hope you find this one. I'm wondering if I should upload these blend files for you to poke through in the near future. Let me know in the comments, or drop a like. If you like what I do, also drop a like and share the video. And I will see you in day 11 for the next Nodevember prompt.